I'd like to start off this podcast by issuing you another apology.
Oh, I'll take it.
I am just wearing a nice Travis Matthews Coors Light sweater today. No Farwell for Hire t-shirt. I got home late, had to rush down here, couldn't find it. It might be in the wash, but I apologize. But I do have, which you can buy if you're local, a nice Farwell for Hire Block 3 beer behind me. I had to put the Molson Canadian one next to it because I am who I am. But I had to go and buy a beer at Block 3. I actually bought a 6-pack because I am who I am. One has to make it as decoration, though. Anyway, Farwell for Hire campaign, day 25 at the time of this recording. What did you do today, Mike?
Popey, honest to goodness, it's all turning into such a blur. But because it's, what's funny is just before we started this podcast, and I was also, we were texting during the week to set this up that here's the time we're going to get together and record, and you're like, can we do a little bit of something beforehand? And I'm like, Popey, like I'm coming in hot, like I'm booked until a half hour before we start and this and that. So I got home about 10 minutes early, so about 40 minutes before we started recording I was home, and then I made a huge mistake. I sat down. I'm telling you, I almost didn't. And I'm not talking like sinking into the sofa. I'm talking about just sitting down at the dinner table. And I'm like, oh, now I have to get back up again. I am old. I'm out of shape. I'm a hurting unit. I just got back. Have you ever heard of a water cube before? I think
that's called an ice cube.
No, Mike, it's not. This is the thing. It's like a rain barrel on steroids, except it's massive. It filled the entirety of the back of the pickup truck that Malul Blamey Construction gives me to help out with my tasks, which is great. Thanks, Malul Blamey, because I had to pick up this honking thing out at some tree farm today and haul it back to this guy's house and then haul it off the truck again and set it all up. And then we weren't done. Then it was the spout for the sump pump that needed to be reconnected. And then there was the washing machine that needed to be leveled. And there was the Christmas tree. It's May, and the Christmas tree had to go back into the top of the garage. Like, I don't know what the hell. That was just one stop this afternoon, Popey. I'm telling you, I'm about baked, but we're humming. We're humming along. We're pushing towards that goal. You talk about the Face for Radio IPA from Block 3, and we got lots of people helping out with lots of things. And hey, you know what you can do? Great shot on YouTube of the Face for Radio can. Block 3 has been great to me for many, many years on this campaign. If you are listening anywhere in the province of Ontario, go to rangers5050.com and buy a 50-50 ticket, because the jackpot as we record is $14,000. It's only going to go up from there. We're making the draw on June the 6th. And when you buy a ticket, you see that jackpot. You're not getting just half that. That's your share. And cystic fibrosis is also getting a share. So if you buy a ticket at rangers5050.com, the jackpot goes up, and so too does the money we raise for cystic fibrosis. So there you go.
Real quick note on that. Rangers don't get anything. Just using the rangers5050.com. I'm just pointing it out.
Good point.
This isn't a Rangers 50-50, just using the Rangers Reach charity arm of the Rangers organization to work the 50-50 for Farwell for Hire.
You nailed it. Because see, I may be able to move a water cube and level a washing machine, but I cannot run a 50-50. So I called in some friends, and Rangers Reach were those friends. And so they're just backing me up on that one.
I'm on vacation this week, and I've already filled in the holes in the backyard. But if you're looking for something to do, maybe Thursday or Friday, I have a couple pumpkins, maybe from Halloween, you could take.
I've done the Christmas tree. Might as well do Halloween now. Hey, can we talk though about the holes in the backyard? Because my beloved is obsessed with filling ours for like the 5th or 6th time. I'm like, honey, I love you. We need to stop doing this, because the dog does not stop digging them or redigging them. Have you had success in stopping Gus from digging or redigging the holes?
Well, the other day, so I filled them, grass seed, did the whole thing, water, blah, blah, blah. The other day, my brother and his family are coming over. I hadn't seen them in a little while, so they came over just for a beer in the backyard, hang out for a couple hours. Well, the dogs are out there. It's hot. I was just about to fill Gus's pool up because he's a golden retriever. The guy goes bananas over the hose and pools, like next worldly. He'll sit next to the hose. If the hose is just off in the backyard, like laying down, he'll sit next to it until you want to play with him with the hose. That's the kind of attention he wants from the water. Anyway, so I say to my brother, I'm like, hey, you okay with your dog getting wet? I'm like, I'm going to fill up this pool. And he's like, no, he's not going in my truck if he's wet. Couple half hour goes by. Dogs are panting like crazy. He goes, yeah, whatever, fill up the pool. I doubt he'll even go in it. Fast forward to fill up the pool. They're goofing around, having some fun. Well, then the four of us start talking and we forget about the dogs. And I look back, and right next to the pool is a hole that I filled. And that hole is now ripped out, and both dogs' head and paws are in there, and they wet dog digging up fresh topsoil. You can imagine what both those dogs look like. So besides that one, yes, I've had some success, but it's still early. It's only been a week.
The best news about that is your brother's muddy dog had to go back in his truck. That's a win for you.
It's hey,
sorry, Nick. Sorry.
Right? I know. I say to him all the time, hey, you're the guy with 3 kids, a dog, and a cat. It's not me. Okay. You got to worry about all these problems. My life is pretty simple. He hates it. But no, it was great to have the kids over. It was great to have the dogs over. We had actually had the kids last Friday for a sleepover, set up the little living room, put the air mattress out, ordered some chips and treats from the convenience store, skip the dishes because the kids think it's hilarious. And yeah, it was a good time. But the holes, we're knocking on wood. If you are listening to this podcast and you have any solution to stop my dog from digging holes, other than sprinkling cayenne pepper across our entire backyard every week, we would love some tips because we're both struggling, and we both looks like they're transporting a pet cemetery into our backyard right now.
farwellandpope@gmail.com is the email address. You'll find Poper on Twitter @_Chris Pope, and you'll find me @Farwell_OHL. These dogs and their behavior, it's almost like it's criminal. I mean, if I were watching for a crime or I saw one in progress, it would be happening in my backyard the way the dog digs the hole. So maybe what I'm going to do is call 1-800-222-TIPS. That's the number for Crime Stoppers. Your anonymity is assured. You can get up to $2,000 for every tip that you provide if it leads to an arrest in the case. And Waterloo Region Crime Stoppers is our proud sponsor and supporter on this podcast. We love the work that they do, the volunteers that get involved. There's a golf tournament coming up again this summer because everything they do is fundraised. So just remember, you can be a partner in your community if you see a crime in progress, if you see something that needs the attention of police. 1-800-222-TIPS. Your anonymity is guaranteed. Or local, of course, to our region, go to waterloocrimestoppers.com and you can put in your tip electronically as well.
Over to Guelph, where Cam Allen won Rookie of the Year. Your thoughts?
I like it. I like it a lot. I remember a game in the season between the Rangers and the Storm where he had his first career hat trick. And he was one of those guys, because we got to see him so much, you could see the progression in his game, right? I remember you and I even talking about him prior to one of the games with some of the scouts or the others in the media room, just because, again, you could see that progression. And that's only through the 10 viewings that we got through the season. So I liked seeing it happen. And I liked that it went to a defenseman. There's something about that I appreciate from the league. So certainly a deserving nod from where I'm sitting.
He's a stud.
Yeah.
There's this guy came in, and if Guelph didn't have such an experienced and older back end, he's probably their number one defenseman. Like, he is so good. And when George drafted him, he had talked about how he thought he was the only defenseman that could come in and be your power play quarterback like right away. And I think he could have done that. George went out and drafted a guy to fill in for Daniil Chayka when Chayka leaves now. And they found a guy. I love his game, and the defense core with Michael Bushinger back there, another first round selection with the Guelph Storm, and all those forwards. Man, Guelph's going to be fun for the next couple. Not so fun for Rangers fans, but a lot of fun for hockey fans over the next couple of years.
Well, and you talk about Rangers fans, and even coming into the season that just ended, there was talk that the Rangers were going to do this past season what they did, and that was sell off some assets because they needed to recoup some draft picks, et cetera, and then they'd be gearing up for 22-23. But look at that division. The Midwest division is going to be a nightmare with the way Owen Sound looks, with the way Guelph looks. London is always strong. Erie is on its way back up. Man, oh man, that division's going to be a lot of fun.
What else is
watch? New? Yeah, good point.
Right?
Very good point. Absolutely.
And of course, as much as we talk about the Midwest division, it's 2 teams left in the Western Conference from the West division, Windsor and Flint.
I'm still surprised at this point. And I mean, look, I'm not going to be welcome back in the Dort when we go there next year. I mean, no disrespect, but I am. I'm just being honest. I'm surprised. I'm owning to what I said coming into the playoffs, and I think a lot of folks felt that way. We just talked to Mark Woolley on the podcast last week, and we mentioned it to him. A lot of people had Owen Sound as the sexy upset pick in round one. In round now, the Firebirds are in round three, and it was because everybody thought, well, I know I did. Early in the season, they racked up wins against Saginaw and Erie, blah blah blah. They are more than holding their own. We saw the Windsor Spitfires firsthand. I thought that after the first two games of that second round against the Rangers, it was as though the Spits just said, okay, we're getting rid of you, 7 seed. Get off our backs, you pesky dog. Shake that leg and get it off your pant cuff. But boy, oh boy, the Flint Firebirds are still right there. It's 1-1 in the series as we record this right now, and certainly not embarrassing themselves by any stretch. So don't sleep on Flint is what I'm saying.
I'm right with you. I'm surprised they are where they are. Listen, I love Flint. Go back and listen to any of our podcasts talking about Flint. I have ranted and raved that I wanted to be there for a playoff game for so long. And here they are having that playoff success, and I can't go, or rather just don't go. But still, it's a long drive. I still want them to be successful, but I never had them making it this far. I really didn't. They were always near the top of the West Division and stuff, but I just didn't think they really had that level that other teams did.
Well, and can we just say, again, no disrespect to the Windsor Spitfires, because I love what Bill Bowler has done there. He was not shy about making moves this season. We've talked about that on the podcast before, but maybe it is time. Like, Windsor, get the hell out of the way and let somebody else have some success. We talk about London. Everybody in the OHL talks about London, the big green giants, and everybody loves to hate them. Let's not forget three Memorial Cups for the Windsor Spitfires in, what was it, 9 years?
Yeah.
And now they're back into a Western Conference final where they were in 2011 after their back-to-back Memorial Cup. So they win in 09, they win in 10, they go to the West final in 2011. They win again in 17, the Memorial Cup, and here they are this year back into the Western final at minimum. I mean, hey, Windsor, share the love. Let somebody else have a little taste of success. Go Flint is what I'm saying. Love you, Spitfires. Oh, and I love Antonino's pizza. Thank you. Yeah.
And Gennaro's.
Gennaro's. Enzo, I'm just joking, buddy. We'll see you. Bring out the shots. Next, we'll talk about this. We'll figure it out.
All that success for Windsor, though, and they're just enjoying the ride because they've won their first playoff series since 2011.
Yeah,
that's true. The thing you have to remember, right? Yeah, the Memorial Cups are great, and we talk about them a lot. 3 Memorial Cups in 9 years, but no series win since 2011. What would that do in this, like in Kitchener's market? No playoff wins? I can tell you what it would do.
Kitchener's market is already restless enough.
Well, exactly.
Right. And there have been playoff wins, but there haven't been championships. I'd still, honestly, I get your point. I'd still take the championships any day of the week.
Well, of course you do. There's banners.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. And you know what? Whoever does come out, whether it is Flint or Windsor, good luck. Good luck.
I mean, is it just me, or are the Hamilton Bulldogs getting better series by series? They are an absolute buzzsaw running through this league right now.
It's honestly insane. Like you think back to some of those records of, what is it? Would you say 16-2? Is that the best?
16-2 is the best playoff record. London owns that. And then 14-0, the 19 Ottawa 67s set that to start the playoffs, and then lost after they won the first 2 games of the OHL final. Guelph took the next 4. So those are the 2 records that are being chased. 14-0 to start, 16-2 overall.
Yeah, and I just don't know how. I don't know how you can test a team that has 2 shutouts already in the playoffs through the first 2 rounds. They've outscored North Bay in the first 2 games that are finished. Their third one's playing right now in North Bay. But in those games in Hamilton, they outscored the North Bay Battalion 10-2.
So that's good. That's dominant. Is that what you're getting at?
Let me just run the numbers again. 10 much larger than 2. Yes, I believe that's pretty good. And again, this is North Bay. This isn't a slouch of a team. This is a team that was near the top of the conference all year long. And what they're doing to everyone is just, you just shake your head. They're so deep. Their defense, like, well, let's start with their goaltender. That Hamilton believes he's one of the best goaltenders, if not the best goaltender in the league. Marco Constantini. And then their back end from Jack Guy and Steos all the way down. And then their forwards like Hayes, McTavish, Middleton. It's crazy how good that hockey team is. I hope that, again, game 3 right now in that East final is being played right now. At this time, it's just the end of the second and Hamilton's up 4-3. So a little closer, but I don't think they've had a 1-goal game. Oh no, they did. They won in overtime. That's right, to oust Mississauga. That was their first and only 1-goal game this playoffs. And that was in game 4 to sweep Mississauga, Arbor Jack Guy overtime winner ball game.
You just mentioned a name a moment ago that I just want to mention again. I know I've talked about him at points along the podcast through this season, and we give Arbor Jack Guy a lot of press for, I think, very good reason. The story is well known. We saw him move through the ranks here in Kitchener, but I am a huge, and I mean a huge, Nathan Steos fan. I love what that guy brings to the ice, and not surprised at all to see the success of this Bulldogs team. They're just they're well built, and we've talked about Steve Steos, the way he put this team together, the moves he made at the deadline with an already good team to make it a much better team, and they are paying dividends to this point, certainly in the playoffs.
I said Middleton, and I meant Winterton. My apologies. I'm from Palmerston. Stratford's close.
The Middleton boys they've gone through already.
My apologies. Anyway, just a buzzsaw. Crazy.
All right, you're a Palmerston boy. Stratford's close. So too is the fine city of Kitchener, and
hey,
my old college buddy. I can't really call him that, but
I think I'm going to stop you because I normally do the intro to the clip, but you have to do this one.
Do I have to?
Yeah, come on.
Well, this is just, for me, it was always fun seeing this guy in the Ontario Hockey League, because when I started in the league as a broadcaster, he was an official. And I'm like, I remember this name. Oh yeah, because when I was in college studying broadcasting, there was a league called the OCAA, the Ontario Collegiate Athletics Association, which just don't exist anymore. But I covered the Conestoga College Condors as I learned my way through this broadcasting thing. And I know I've still got a lot of learning to do, but back then there was a standout player in the Ontario Collegiate Athletics Association named Joel Washkurak. He was tearing it up with the Conestoga College Condors. He went on to become a referee in the Ontario Hockey League after having played in the OHL with Kingston before ending up in the OCAA. And we reconnect on this week's episode of OHL Stories.
For Waterloo Crime Stoppers. Washer, I'm sure throughout this podcast, like every other podcast, we'll talk about a lot of the players you played against and a lot of the players you played with. We'll maybe even get in talking about your sons. However, I need to ask you about that guy.
What? No.
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask him.
Okay. Give me a good Mike Farwell story from your time.
He was just, sniffing around the arenas, always wanted to talk to those lugs that played for Conestoga College. It was good. How many interviews we had Farzy together back in the day?
I'll tell you, I can tell you this much, Washer. I always looked up to you. Literally.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's why I wanted to start the same kind of way. I was going to start you real easy with like a true and false here, or a true or false. True or false that you still hold the OCAA record for most points ever scored by a Conestoga College Condor? Come on.
Well, I don't know that.
I don't know.
But I will tell you this, just at the start of COVID, when we were first in our first shutdown, Scotty Strachan must have been cleaning his garage or something, and he took a picture of my statistics in the league, and I was like third in league scoring. There was a couple guys from Cambrian College that were ahead of me, and one other guy from Seneca, I think. But the points were like within 1 or 2 or 3. But I killed them in penalty minutes. I think I had like 114 or 134 penalty minutes and was like third in scoring. And I showed my kids, and my wife was just like, "Oh my God, man, you wonder where they get it from." Right?
Exactly.
But you forget about stuff like that, right? Because it was all for, as you know, as you followed us, like my first 2 years, we won national titles. So it was all about the win, right? I remember my first championship, I won tournament MVP, which was good because, I tried to play the game the right way, and I found a little skill on the side there, but didn't mind the sandpaper side of the two are neither, right? So
just to give everybody the background on what this is all about, the OCAA doesn't even exist anymore. Collegiate sports don't happen, but he's not lying. I was sniffing around the room because I was at Conestoga College to study broadcasting, and we had a hockey team there, and Joel Washkurak, no BS, was the star of that hockey team.
Yeah,
I mean, Scotty might say something different, but
yeah, for sure. No, there was like Darren Kinnear, Dave Long. Like my first 2 years, Chris, because you asked the question, like we had probably 3 or 4 for sure OHL players on my team, and then a couple like had a cup of coffee with OHL teams. There were times I remember going into at Christmas the University of Guelph Christmas tournament, and we were beating university teams, and it didn't go over well with the university squads, right? Like the guys didn't like it up in Griff's there in the bar afterwards, but we didn't care. We had a pretty decent team, and if all the other guys that didn't play in the OHL all came from either the Waterloo Siskins or the Dutchman who had just won it, like Hooksy and God rest his soul, Corey Stoico, like all those guys that all won the Sutherland Cup that previous years. So it was a really good team, right?
I'm not sure if when Kean was playing in the league, if you listened to our broadcast or if you were there watching, but I don't think we had a Mississauga game on the broadcast without Joel getting mentioned as the standout for the Conestoga Condors.
He's even Twitter. He's putting it on Tweeter or whatever. Farsi's throwing it on Twitter, and then Kenny Longball's there up in Ottawa is chiming in, and I walked up there in the draft, and he's like, "So you're a superstar, eh?" And I was like, "No." Farsi was drinking during class on his assignments, right? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah. I just tried to play the game the right way. I try to install that in the kids that I coached, and of course my own 2 boys that play, even my daughter, right? So
talk to us about that, playing the game the right way, especially when you come into the Ontario Hockey League and play for a guy named Mavety.
Yeah. So my first interactions with Mav were I was a 6th round pick. I think I was went in the 6th round, but I was the 4th pick in the draft. And I remember at that summer, I was planned to work at Cooper Sports Camp in Appleby College. So I was very fortunate. The summer going into my draft year, you'll know all these guys I know. So Roger Hunt, who's the GM of Oshawa, was the instructors. My cousin Joe, Mike Kelly, Pete DeBoer, and then Marty McSorley, and all those guys used to come in from Cayuga and play with myself, Russ Harrington, who is Spotter's brother-in-law, Kyle Merkley, who was Ryan Merkley's dad, who was drafted my same year to North Bay. But we used to work at Appleby College at Cooper Sports Camp with all those guys who ended up having prosperous hockey careers, right? Both as players and on the hockey ops side, right? But where it helped me is I remember first meeting Mav at like a team barbecue. They just had the draftees up to a resort. I forget where it was. I went there with my parents.
Oh, Washer, we lost your audio. We can't hear you right now. I don't know whether it sounded like we heard something click.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got
there
you.
You are.
Yeah. So I'll just recap. So we are at the team barbecue, and I went up to Mav, and I asked him if there was off ice testing before we went on the ice. And he sort of looked at me and he was like, "You don't effing run on the ice, do you, kid?" I was like, No, I didn't, no, sir. Right. But I'll tell you, with playing for Larry Mavety, I would do it without a drop of a hat. I was up there when they did his banner raising, and Mav and I kept in touch even after I finished playing. Loved playing for him. He was just that guy that he just had your back, and he let you play the way you wanted to play. he was more pushing because of his own style. You tend to coach to the style that you played yourself, right? Which was very aggressive and that sandpaper, hardworking, type canvas or fabric. But he also did well with the skills guys, except he sort of gravitated more towards, the ham and eggers or the sandpaper type players, right? And then let the skill guys just, do their skill thing, right?
You did a good job of just talking about Mav. But I'm thinking about some of our younger listeners, and Farwell and I talk a lot lately about the league needs to do more to get these younger people involved in the league and coming to games. And they may hear the name Larry Mavety and they hear stories on this podcast, but what is it about him that made him such a big personality? Like, yes, he had that big voice and everything, but what was it that made him so successful? And because you said it, you'd play for him tomorrow. A lot of people that play for him come on and they rant and rave about what a great coach and guy he was.
Because he was that guy. Chris.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't a big personality. He was that heavy voice on the ice. He pushed you. He yelled at you. He didn't put up with, with mediocrity. Like your game shouldn't be average. You had to put it all on the line. And if you did that for him, right, he would go through the wall for you. And he would always welcome you and your family. We'd talk all the time. Like even after I finished playing for Mav, right? And I hear the guys on the podcast as well saying that, right? He was just that type of guy where, we were up there in Kingston in November. There was like Mush, Brian Marshman, Steve Bancroft, and Thordy, right? Same. They would probably all tell you the same thing, right? Yobber, Mike told me that he was talking to Yobber. Yobber sat right beside me in my stall for like 2 years. Right. So I keep in touch with those meatheads. I keep in touch with probably 3/4 to all of my teammates back in Kingston. And then some of the new guys like Kelly Corpse and Mike Dawson, who now scouts for Seattle. Like I see all those guys. I actually see Tony Similero and Mike Dawson. I usually stop off in Kingston on my way up to training camp and usually stay at Simmers or Doss's. And then the next morning I'll get up, have a coffee down by the waterfront, and then head to Ottawa. There's times here, and I won't ever divulge that I'm getting soft in my old age, but there were times where I think 2 years ago, pre-COVID, I grabbed a coffee and went. The guy let me in at the old Memorial Gardens where I played, and it was just me in the arena, and that big picture of the Queen at the one end, right where the Zamboni came out. I was just like, you're just recapping and reflecting your life, right? Because Kingston was a great city, and I go back there all the time, and I had such fond memories of playing for the Kingston Frontenacs and living in Kingston. I still keep in touch with guys that didn't play on the Kingston Frontenacs that I went to school with there. Right. So
I'm gonna remember that washer has gone soft. It's good to know. That sandpaper, that hard-nosed player that we've known for so long, right. And that we're gonna get into refereeing too. Don't worry about it. But we did indeed talk to Yobber. First of all, he
got a
says,
message for you.
Yep. He says you're a jackass. So there you go.
Oh, we're allowed to say a swear on here? Perfect.
Oh, yeah. What the heck?
Oh, yeah. Podcast.
Second of all, he told us a little story from his side of it about you as a rookie. And I guess the rookie party was either happening or maybe you didn't know, but they had to get you out of bed to go to the rookie party. What was it like from your end being awakened?
I don't remember that. What's he talking about?
I don't know.
Was it during the? I'm not sure.
They said they had to go and pull you out of bed.
He did?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember, guys. To be honest,
I think that was part of like the. I'm lacking for a better word, but the initiation. Of like, hey, get up, we're going. All of a sudden, there's 3 vets in your room, and you're like, what?
Yeah. I do remember that. You're right. Well, I lived with some big guys there, right? My first year, I lived with Drake Barahowski. And Mike Bondarchuk, right? But they might have had, I think we had the rookie party were at my billet house, to be honest with you. So I was probably having a nap, right? Not knowing what I was getting into, but they had us running back then. Everything sort of was on the table at the rookie party, but I had great vets. Like they always treated us good. We had a very, very, very cohesive hockey team right in Kingston. So.
Yeah, Yobber said the same thing.
The bed part though, but
might have been a nap.
Yeah, for sure. It was a long night. I know that.
Yeah.
What was life like in Kingston playing in the OHL? That's a awesome city.
That's a great city. We had my first year. I told you where I sort of went. We had 19 veterans, so you had to do whatever it took to make it as a 17-year-old, which I was fortunate enough that I did. Right, just because I surpassed some of our earlier picks, but it was because you ended up playing more of Mavs style, right? But I didn't play a lot, right? So we had 19 veterans. We had a really good team. We had, all through the year, we never had dips and valleys or ups and flows, right? We had a really good team, and we pretty much just sort of shit the bed in the playoffs when we played Game 7. I think it could be even now for the record, one of the longest OHL games in playoff history with the Belleville Bulls. I think it went into 3 overtime periods. And Yobber wouldn't tell you this, but my line mates, Nathan Lafayette and Tony Semolero would. So in that longest game in OHL history, I played 1 shift in the first period. And I never
Nothing else.
And I would we talk about it now, and Simmer will say to me, Washer, remember, like, and then the coach would, I think it was Danny Flynn and Sean McKenzie were coaching in Belleville at the time. The rookie line, the 4th line that we were playing against would be Brent Gretzky, Jake Grimes, and Karts, Darren McCarty, right? So we had I don't know if you got into it with Yobber or not, but I remember my first year, Yobber fought Steve Bancroft. So Yobber and Banger were going at it on the ice, and Steve Bancroft's father and Tony Yobb's dad fought in the stands and went at each other in the stands, and I just total chaos. And I think it was Belleville, but it could have been Kingston too. But anyway, we had some rival games against the Belleville Bulls for sure, and the Oshawa Generals, right? Because come second half, that's when Eric Lindros showed up, right? When he didn't report to the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. So.
You talked about playing with that sandpaper, Washer, and when we look up Joel Washkurak videos online, some of the first ones we see are you chucking them, and you could throw.
Yeah.
What was your first OHL fight like?
My first OHL fight, and probably my last, was against Darren McCarty. So Darren and McCarty and I fought in exhibition. We fought so much that we became buddies. Like over the course of the summers, we also worked at Can-Am Hockey School in Guelph together. But I was reflecting when you were gracious enough to give me this. I was thinking, oh, this is going to come up, right? Like Karts and I would fight every game. And then the people would be like, taking sides depending on where we fought, whether it was in Belleville or whether it was in Kingston. And then we, over the course of my second year and third year, right, we became buddies, and we would just talk in the bench. But I was fortunate enough to fight, like, I think Rod Pasma, who's like 6'5", Darian Hatcher, who's my age. We fought in North Bay. Jeff Riccardi, who played in Ottawa, he now scouts for the Sudbury Wolves. So when I saw him at the OHL Cup, him and Denny Lambert were talking, and Ricky says to me, "Hey, Washer, you think we can go at it one more time?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure I got it in me now, but I don't like your backup. I had no one, and he's got Denny Lambert." And I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm going to pass on this one." Right. But you'll know this, Farzy, because one of the guys my very first year, and we didn't have social media, so you can never tap into it, but I remember playing it. My parents, I grew up most of my life in London, but my dad worked for the Canadian government. So every 3 to 7 years, he was transferred different places, right? But at the time, I grew up most of my life in London playing AAA, moved to Oshawa, and then from Oshawa midgets got drafted to Kingston. But when I went to Kingston, my parents moved to Guelph, where my dad's originally from, and I ended up fighting a guy by the name of Rob Sangster my very first year. So I fought
Tough
this
Kitchener boy.
Oh my God. I fought this savage, and I thought, okay, I did pretty good. The back of my ears were hurting. And I thought, okay, you know what? This is not going to go away. You just have that feeling, right? That sixth sense. And I thought, okay, I'll fight this guy. He'll come to Kingston, and then I won't have to see this guy again. But in between, when I fought him in Kitchener and I fought him in Kingston, I realized that he led the league in penalty minutes the previous year. He had like 400 penalty minutes. And I was like, oh man, like some of the shit you just do as a kid, right? You bite off more than you can chew. And we also had like Yobber could throw him, Mark Major, Jamie Allen, John Nelson. Like we had a tough team as well, right? So you can run around a little full of confidence and piss and vinegar sort of thing. But anyway, sure as shit, Kitchener came to Kingston and I got called. Rob Sangster comes right over to the bench and he calls me on, and sure as shit, Mav kicks me and he says, okay, go get him, kid. So we fought, and then we're in the box, the fight's over, and in the old Memorial Gardens, the penalty box is right beside the Kingston bench. Well, doesn't Rob Sangster say, hey, rookie, why don't you leave your bucket in the box? So we stepped out of the box and went at it again. Okay, now listen, I'm a 17-year-old guy. I might have weighed 165 soaking wet my very first year. And I thought, okay, this is all right. I'll just take my lumps, I'll do the best I can, which I did. And I don't have to see this guy ever again. Trade deadline, he gets traded to the Ottawa 67s, and I got to play them another 8 more times. And I was like, oh man, what did I ever do in my 17 years of living to deserve this, right? But anyway, I obviously was over here when in Guelph. I used to, in the summers, I used to come over here to either Don Cherry's or Loose Change Louis with like Ricer, Johnny Spoltor, Troy Stevens, Stroey, all the guys, right? And I met my wife at Loose Change Louis, and I've been stuck here for 27 years in this beautiful city of Kitchener-Waterloo.
I really thought you were going to say stuck with her for this long. I was this guy's going off the rails. You are going to be in some serious trouble.
Chris, man, for 27 years to put up with oh man, she's a saint.
She's a saint.
Yeah. I thought, we are going.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Smart. Okay.
Never.
You mentioned Sangster and McCarty, and you got to be a little loopy to go fight those guys. But what on earth were you thinking fighting Darian Hatcher? That man is a monster.
Yeah, you know what? I don't even remember the outcome of the fight, but I just remember I couldn't even get anywhere near him. Like the reach was like, I probably said that about 2 seconds sitting in the box after fighting him. I just, you know what, Chris, to be honest with you, I just, I didn't play much because of my first year, right, with the 19 veterans. And I just thought, you know what, you got to contribute somehow. So, you know what, I was never shy to do that in the schoolyard, right? So I thought, once you have one fight, you do okay, right? The confidence level just builds, and then your tactics and stuff like that, right? So, but there back then, like you had, again, I mentioned him today, like Scotty Thornton, like 30 would probably be a 30, 40 goal scorer in the OHL back at the time, but he was tough as nails. Like you had guys that could play the game too, but also brought that sandpaper where now, I played with a guy, Justin Morrison. I tell him when I talk to him, Mo, your record will never be broken, because he had 100 points in the OHL, which is not an easy task, but he also had 200 penalty minutes. Like I said to him, that record will never get broken. Like any player coming up through the system now that has 100 points, well, I'd hope they'd have at least 20 penalty minutes, but you never know, man, right? And my kids would, or they'd be in trouble. But again, now if you're a goal scorer, that's what you do. You don't, you just play that skill side of the game, right?
Yeah, it's such a good point.
I just think of Hatch. I've told Farzy this, being down waiting for the Sarnia Sting to come into the rink for the post or pregame interviews, and he's carrying like a suitcase or like a bag, and it's basically on the ground. His arms are he's a monster of a man.
Yeah, like you don't think about it, right? Like I was sort of reminiscing about it's trying to think of the questions that you guys might ask, right? And I just remember fighting him, and I couldn't get anywhere. And when you fight a guy like that, you have to get in close, right? Yeah. Or he's gonna drape you with the midnight danglers all over your nose.
I love Hatch. We got to get him on here.
We talked about the same thing with Yobber around the game today, because you guys obviously played a similar style. You knew what you had to do, Osher. You went out there and you did your thing, and you didn't back down. How do you feel about, especially with kids in the game, how do you feel about the game today versus when you were playing it?
So I think the kids today are a lot more skilled, a lot faster, can play the game, can think the game. It all depends on the fabric of what you look for, right? But back then, when Yabber and I and that whole era of late 80s, early 90s played, right? It was being able to play both ways was being able to fight, right? And having success fighting. You won't see that like now. Like now you look at kids and you'll say, hey, you know what? They're tough, but they're not they're not tough in terms of fighting, because you never see that in midget hockey, and you very rarely see it in the OHL. But how that translates, where back in the 90s, you needed to play the game, but you also needed to protect yourself and your teammates through fighting. Now you just need to be tough to play against, right? In my opinion, there's still tough kids that play in the OHL, but again, people used to say when Kean was going through it, hey, is your boy as tough as you are? And I'd be like, nah, I really don't know. I try to do tough love here at home to some degree, but you really don't know it until he gets punched in the nose. He's going to do one of two things. He's either going to fight back or he's going to turtle. And if he turtles, he's going to get it when he comes in here, right? I'm kidding, but you know what I'm saying, that mentality, right? So I've been fortunate that way, where both my boys play a similar style. They're not afraid to stand up for themselves or their teammates, right? So
you mentioned a couple names, and I think I know the answer to this question, but were you ever scared of a fight in the OHL?
Never scared of a fight, because I never was one of those guys, and I didn't get to the next level where it was staged, right? Where you could think about it, days in advance. It was just like, back then when you're, 17, 18, 19 years old, you just knew that, it could come at any point. Like I said, with Carts, with Darren McCarty, it just happened all the time. Jeff Riccardi, we fought quite a bit. Right. But it's a style of game that I played. You knew it was coming, because I wasn't like overly skilled. I had some skill, but I just wanted to play that 200-foot hockey game, and that's what you pride yourself on. And I pride myself on this, and I even say it to my kids, especially Kian now. I said, you know what, you are what you value, right? I'm big on that, and you know what, be proud of that. Right? Because sometimes, like being the hardest worker or relentless on the forecheck, I always used to tell my sons, and well, Kian for sure, hard on the puck, you want to be the first on the puck, but you want to be the first back, because when he was going through it, right, the 30, 40, 50 goals a season would come to an end, and Adam and Pee Wee, and they just try and push the 200 complete. Now you watch the NHL playoffs and regular season, there's not too many guys that don't play 200-foot hockey games, right? So I'll be kind to the Leafs. So
please do. They need it. You talked earlier, and I shouldn't have chirped you for being soft about that coffee in the All Memorial Gardens. I know but honestly, because when I walk out of the Memorial Auditorium on Friday nights after my post-game show, and it's only me and some of the arena staff, it's one of my favorite times in the empty, quiet arena. But going back to that old Memorial Gardens, like that place was a barn washer. I know we can recognize that now for what it was, but what was one of your favorite or least favorite rinks to play in back in the day?
Well, probably I have a story about the arena in Cornwall, and I won't swear because there was no swearing. Well, there was sort of swearing, but you know what? If you can't laugh, you can't laugh at yourself. Who can you laugh at, right? So I played in Cornwall my first year, and this fan says to me, "Hey, Washkurak, is that a name or an appliance?" And I was like,
bad.
Like I was like, what? What? But you can't say anything because that fan's got you, right? And it's just like, wow, that's sort of a good one. And I remember sort of just putting my head down, and the guys beside me were just sort of giggling and laughing, and I was like, oh man, I got to go and play harder than that, right? But I remember, now that you say this, I remember Mav getting into it with that fan that was chirping me, right, and like threatening to go into the crowd. And back then, right,
he would have.
Yeah, he would have, right? Like back then, like Bill LaForge, man. I remember when Bill LaForge coached my very first year. We played an exhibition game, or very early in the season. We were in Niagara Falls, and he laced our bench with sand, right? So we would lose our edges, and Mav was going bananas, right? And then, when Mav goes bananas, you know what happens out on the ice, right? There is no hockey game, and it's like rock'em sock'em hockey, right? But stuff like that, that would never fly today. That guy would be, Bill, he'd be suspended indefinitely in today's day and age, right?
You talked about Mav. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. No, I was just going to go back to your question about one of the arenas to play in. Probably, obviously the Guelph Memorial. I like I didn't mind, but I didn't love playing in Belleville because being that Olympic size, it was the only Olympic size rink in the league, right? But the smaller, for me, guys, in the way I played, the smaller rinks were way better. I remember playing in Sudbury my first year where we were winning and like 4-1 going, and they came back and tied it. We couldn't even hear the referees' whistles. It was that loud in the arenas. And I remember like playing against Eric Lindros, like the arenas were very, very busy, very, very loud and chaotic, right? It was those old arenas where the crowd was right on top of you. Even the old Oshawa Civic Center was like that. Not these new ones where the crowd is sort of spread out, right? So when the crowd is over top of you, right, it just heightens that intensity, right?
So, I know I'm fast forwarding a little bit here, but
yeah,
how does somebody who played in the OHL with Kingston end up working for Ottawa?
Yeah.
And is that okay?
Yeah, I guess it was okay. It probably wouldn't sit well with JR when my kid was going to Mississauga, and Boydie drafted him. But what happened there was Kean got drafted like by JR and James Boyd and Jan Eggert. At the time, where Boydie was the GM, of course, and Jan Eggert was the AGM, and then JR was the coach. So Kean went there. I had been looking to, I think in 2014, I reached out to a bunch of teams. Guelph Storm was one of them, Kingston, Boydie, and Mississauga, to reach out just to start the process. I even met Spotter and Murray Hubert one time for lunch at the Chill to just talk about next steps. I had finished refereeing. After 17 years, Kean was sort of on his way to going on his own. My other middle boy, Caden, he was playing, I think at the time, AA, and just made the jump to AAA. And I was just looking at, the 5-year plan. And when these guys are doing their own thing, what am I going to do? Like, I've been part of the OHL since I was 17, right? It's been a part of my life. The refereeing years were great, but when Boydie went to Ottawa, a local boy here, Jerry Skrypek, was at the time the Ottawa 67's area scout for the Alliance. So Boydie called me in September and said, "Hey, Washer, are you interested in scouting for us? Skryzy's not coming back." So not that I didn't trust Boydie, I just didn't. I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, right." So I got on the phone and talked to Skryzy and asked him, and he's like, "No, Washer, I'm done. It's all yours, bud." And then it just started from there. So I started scouting for Ottawa in the 2002 date of birth draft.
So let's not gloss too much over that 17 years as a referee, because these parallels kind of, they catch me every once in a while, right? I'm trying to start out in broadcasting. There's Joel Washkurak on the ice with the Conestoga College Condors. I get my way finally into the OHL, and I got to see this Washkurak out there as a damn referee. Like, what's happening to me here? But what possessed you to go from a guy that was on the receiving end of some chirps as a player, probably because of your style, to putting on the orange armbands?
Yeah. So how that started, Farzy, was my dad was really good friends with the Holodes, who own the Holode Platers, right? Obviously with the Ukrainian backgrounds, through my grandfather and the Dvorskys.
Ah, yeah.
So Mr. Dvorsky was sitting at my table drinking coffee and probably something else with my father on a Saturday morning, and asked me what I was doing after I was done hockey. And I said, you know what, Mr. D, I honestly, I really don't know. And he's like, well, why don't you ever think about getting into refereeing? At the time, you looked up, in Guelph, there was like Ron Asseltine and Andy Van Helleman, McCreary, all those guys, Gregson, they all lived in the city of Guelph, right? So, you know what? I just took a chance. I remember showing up to the University of Waterloo to this referees camp with a Condors red helmet and my skates. And Greg Dvorsky was like, Washer, what the hell are you doing? Him and Scotty Driscoll were sort of the camp counselors. So Devo had to drive home and go get me equipment. But because I could skate, for the most part, all these other people, I had NHL gear on, right? So they were coming up to me and saying, "Hey, what are you doing here? Right? You're already in the NHL." And I was like, "No, this is just borrowed stuff." So how we would do it, guys, is I think it was the U17s did their camp for Ontario, for Team Ontario at that time at the University of Waterloo at Columbia Icefields. And Scotty Driscoll and Greg Dvorsky, they mic'd my ear and they were telling me, okay, Washer, skate up to the blue line. If it's offside, blow your whistle. I had no clue what was going on, like absolutely no clue what was going on, but you keep going with it. And because of my skating abilities, I worked Guelph minor hockey my first year and junior, maybe a handful of junior B games, but mostly junior C games. And then within 1 year, I was, as a linesman, was working in the ECHL, United Hockey League, the OHL, and the OHA. So it took me like 1 year to just do it. And then I lined for like 7 years, 5 to 7 years. And then the first league to give me an opportunity of refereeing, I worked like all the finals as a linesman. And then the UHL came to me and said, "Hey, Washer, you ever think about refereeing?" And sometimes when I was lining, some of the referees would say, "Hey, Washer, should I have called this?" And I'm like, "Hey, yeah, I'm making $100 in a game. You're making 300. Why are you asking me? Give me the 300 if I'm making the calls out here, right?" So I would do that. So then I just started doing it. And then it evolved to me I think I refereed for, I don't know, 10, 12 years, and then 5 years as a linesman. So many stories, lots of good guys, lots of fights with coaches, not fights, but verbal fights. Right. But it's all good. I tell Dave Branch, I said to Dave Branch a couple of years ago when I saw him, I was like, "Hey, Branchy, I played in this league. I refereed in this league. And if I ever get to even managing or coaching in this league, I doubt the coaching will ever happen, but managing," said, "You'll have to name a trophy after me." And he's like, "Over my dead body, Washington, naming a trophy after you." Right. So it's just a friendly joking with Dave, right? Dave's been good to me and my family. Right. So.
Absolutely. Who was the most heated coach that you experienced while wearing the stripes?
Most heated? Probably Vellucci, Mike Vellucci in Plymouth. Right. Just when things were going not Plymouth's way, he just loses marbles. Right. Dale Hunter was probably the most, he just, like he was as a player, you just, he didn't really get too boisterous or too excited, but you knew that if he didn't like the way you were refereeing, shit was going to get out of hand, right? And you had to heighten your game because he had guys that could play, very skilled or play that dirty or that rough sandpaper side of the game, right? Stan Butler, was a good guy. Like he always treated us good, but he would lose it sometimes. I remember one game, him and Pete DeBoer got at it, and I was stuck right in the middle of it, right? But Stan would always be like, "I want to talk to you, Washer, after the game," or in between periods. And I used to work at Can-Am with Stan, so I'd say, "You know what, Stan? Absolutely, I will give you you can ask away and I'll answer them honestly," right? Because as a referee, you only have your honesty and your consistency is what you can offer. You don't know what's going to happen in those games back then, right? It was a little bit rougher, a little bit faster, right? They still had, line brawls and stuff like that. And it still got a little scary and hairy at times, right? But I remember I remember Stan, just being heated at me and wanting to talk to me. And then in Brampton, he walked down one side and then the room was there, and I walked down the other side of the rink, and you had to go to the referee's room, which is in the same hallway. So he's like, Washer, you get your ass down here. I want to talk, blah, 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 blah. This penalty, I didn't believe, blah, blah, blah. This was a call. Call was bullshit, blah, blah. I said, hey, Stan, are you done? He's like, yep. I said, can I ask my questions? And I said to him, hey, Stan, did you practice power play this week in practice? And he's like, yeah. And I said, what about PK? Did you practice that, maybe Wednesday or Thursday? And he's like, yeah. I said, so you knew I was going to call goddamn penalties then. And he didn't say anything. He just sort of looked at me and stopped, turned around and walked to his bench. And then you see him, a couple of weeks later, and he's like, oh, Washer, he goes, you got me. And he goes, I didn't know what to say to you. And I was like, perfect. Right. Killer was heated at when Killer spoke. Like, you had guys like Mav and Killer and Bert Templeton, right? When those guys, for whatever reason, I always sort of felt like, because they all knew that I played, and I didn't go out there and try to call a million penalties. I just called what I had to call, or what was there in front of me, right? It's part of that honesty and integrity as an official, right? But I remember, refereeing with Killer, when those guys spoke, you knew something, you missed something, right? Because they didn't speak very often. Right. But then you clue on very quick sometimes, where the more arguments you had with Killer, the more beer you got after the game.
Sounds about right.
Right? And you're not going, once you're in Ottawa, you're not going back until the next night. Right. But, you try to stay away from those guys, right? And making sure that, you just refereed the game to the best of your ability and with integrity and honesty. Right.
I want to take that just a step further, because that's obviously how you're dealing with the other professionals in the game, those coaches and the players, etc. But from the fan perspective, it's the most thankless job that there is. And look, we've had lots of conversations, Pope and I, on the air, and I admit to being, I'm trying to get better. I'm still probably harder on the officials than I should be. But can you take us onto the ice, Washer? Like, what's it like as you're trying to do that job with so much going on around you?
Yeah, there's lots going on, right? You got, your players are talking to you. You got the game that, game situations and game plays happen in a split second, right? And you got to make a call. You got to make a decision as to whether that was a penalty, not a penalty. You got fans yelling at you. You got coaches yelling at you. Sometimes, back when I first started, I remember Mike Kelly banging. I was just a linesman, but Al Kimmer was refereeing the game, and Mike Kelly's banging on the side, hanging over the Memorial Gardens in Guelph, just banging and going nuts. And again, the crowd is on top of you. So when they see their GM going nuts, just total chaos in the game, right? You got to control all that. There isn't one referee that referees at any level that wants to make a mistake, right? They're like this. It's not even if you have a run-in with a coach or a player one game, you don't go into that game the following game and say, oh, I don't forget you. As a referee, you sort of let that go and you just move on to your next game, right? And that the good referees have obviously a task or a skill to be able to do that, right? Because it's not easy, losing a grudge that, some guy just thinks you blew the game, right? But I always, to my disadvantage or advantage, I always talk to the players, even as a linesman or as a referee. I would rather talk to them than call a penalty, right? And guys like Jimmy Lever and Bill Prisniak, they would, just being an ex-player, the game, right? I just had to be taught the mechanics, but the way, tit for tat, you can sort of let that go. But all my supervisors, Ken Bodendistel, they always used to say, Washer, because you played and your style of officiating, you could let stuff go because you just had rapport with those guys, right? So it's all about rapport and relationship, right? There's the odd time where I'd get into a verbal match and stuff like that with coaches, but it never went anywhere, right? It would just, once it sort of just aired out, you just go into your room, you go on home, and you get ready for the next day.
As somebody who played and officiated, what do you think of video review?
Well, if you're on the receiving end of the good video review and it turns out into your favor, right? It's a handy thing, right? But if it goes against you, Again, some of those video reviews that I've even seen, like even now, right? Some of them take like 10, 15 minutes. And I when I was involved with the game on the ice still as an official, they didn't want that, right? They wanted the games to still stay within the 2 hour and 15 minute, ice sessions, right? But sometimes those goal reviews now take 10, 15 minutes. That's like another additional period or intermission where you can wipe that, your MO right out, right? Your flow, your pace can take someone's or the team's game right out of the game, right? Their pace. So I think it comes in handy at sometimes, but as long as they keep it in check and trying to put it in perspective of what it's used for. I know what it's used for, and so do you guys. They just want the right call made on the ice, right? And you know what? When you're an owner, these franchises are not a couple $100,000 anymore, right? So you got to understand the financial impact, right? Or the karma impact. Look at what happened to the Rangers in that one game before London, right? That to me, they video reviewed it. They made a judgment call, whoever that was, and they disallowed the goal, right? Karma came back and bit London in the ass the game following, because in that overtime period I was watching, right? London was all over Kitchener. But you know what? The pace, the game turns around and the transition goes back down. Brochu kicks out a shot and it comes right to Petizian and he fires it home, right? Knocks London out, right? That karma has a bad way of returning and biting people where it shouldn't be bitten, right? So
I'm wondering when you're a liney in the old United League, I mean, man, you must have had to step into some frays over there.
Yeah. I remember one night, you want to talk about the fan interaction, right? And the response. I remember taking a slap shot in the back of my middle back in Port Huron. It was a very, very, very small rink. So once that defenseman was on that dump in and focused on it, and they're playing in the United League for a reason and not the National Hockey League, I wasn't getting, I just had to eat this puck. And I remember this fan was yelling at me and screaming, get out of the way, right? Obviously with profanity and stuff like that. And I was in so much pain. I think I lost my breath. I had to write an apology letter because I probably said something I shouldn't have said back to her. Right. And of course the fan complains. And I tried to deal with the referee in chief. I'm like, I think it was Mitch Lambert at the time, ex-player as well. Right. Played a number of years in Oshawa and then Hershey. And I was like, Mitch, I just took a full-fledged dump in slap shot. My back has got a welt the size of a pancake. And you're asking me to write an apology letter? Are you crazy? Right. But again, you just did it because they were season ticket holders or whatever. Right. But you wouldn't think about that. But if you can't get it as a referee or as a linesman, you know how narrow-minded some of those guys are. They're focused on doing their job, not where the linesman or referee are. And then that puck's coming down there. And God, look at Hasty. Hasty and I got drafted to Kingston together, and he's still moving out there, right? He's got ninja-like reflexes, still out there. But in those smaller rinks back in the day, all those rinks are pretty big, right? I don't know if my buddy Hasty would be able to get out of the way as quick as he does now.
Well, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. Go.
I was going to bring that up. It happened. I remember distinctively twice this year where he's been, beamed with a puck. And obviously the players say something to him. And in press row, we can hear him, "Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do?" I'm like, as a player, I'm like, just skate away, dude. Don't go anywhere near that man.
You got me, Chris, because I was going to say, well, Hasty would have just turned around and been a professional, as nice as
no.
guy, right?
Well, he's a nice guy, but he's loud.
Yeah, he's just and he's honest too. He's like, "I'm in my spot. What do you want me to do?"
Yeah. Well, as in those situations, fellas, think about this, right? From an official standpoint, I had that, players would yell at me, get out of the way," and I'd be like, "Hey, jackass, you got 82 feet the other way to shoot. Why are you shooting in that other 2 feet that I'm right here in your lane, right? Because you can't, right?" Yeah. I used to talk to guys all the time like that, right? Especially, I can say it now because I'm not officiating, right? But guys would get on me, oh, that's a horseshit call, blah, blah, blah. I'd be like, you know what, dude, horseshit call or not horseshit call, your PK is terrible and you need to work on your power play because it's brutal. Doesn't matter if I call 10 calls for you guys or against you guys, you ain't scoring tonight with that power play I just saw. And I could talk to them like that because I was able to break down the game, right? And say, you can blame me. As you guys know, the officials get blamed for a lot more than they should. But you know what, if you know the game from a playing perspective and from an official standpoint, you could be able to talk about that.
When you're on the ice as an official, I know you got a job to do, but do you recall a player washer that you saw and thought, oh my, now here is a high skill player?
Yeah, there was lots of guys that come to mind. Corey Perry, Mike Richards, Jeff Carter, Joe Thornton was, I think like Boyd Devereaux and those guys too were good, really good players, but I was just starting out when those guys were there, right? So I probably worked 10 or 15 maybe games in the OHL my first year as a linesman. I worked until Christmas and then got cut off. But guys that you remember, John Tavares, right? I did some of his games where I think he got 50 goals in 49 games or something like that in Ottawa, right? You know, good player, Steven Stamkos. Like I watch Steven Stamkos now and the way he scores sort of in that OV sort of spot, just, you know, and that's just off the half wall, but sort of by that face-off dot. And he's had those one-timers since he was 16. And I remember seeing those exact same plays being played out in Sarnia. Right. You don't lose your characteristic traits, right? Like what you see in junior, you usually end up seeing in the pros, right? But when you watch Steven Stamkos rip those one-timers, again, I never refereed OV and I never refereed OV or, you know, Ovechkin in the NHL, obviously, right? But you did in junior with some of those other guys and, you know, their traits, when you see it now, you just go, hasn't changed a bit, right? Saw those when they were 17 years old. And even when you see that now, kids will get better. With me scouting now for the last 5, this past draft was my 5th draft. They get better, they get bigger, stronger, and faster and better. But their characteristic traits or their attributes, they get better, but they're still the same as when you see them in midget, especially the higher picks, right? You'll see guys, you know, and you'll just be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, he's honed his game. He's gotten better. He's gotten more consistent, you know, but we saw all those traits and all those attributes in midget, right? Leading into your draft year, right?
You talk about those drafts. I'm just curious on who the better scout is. Is it Joe Washkurak or is it Joel Washkurak? Well, and why did your parents do that to you guys?
So don't ask my cousin Joe. I've been fighting it since Joe's older than me. And so you have to blame my parents for putting the L. But Joe, my dad's name is Joe. Obviously my cousin's name is Joe. I grew up calling him Joey. And then me. And then even when I was refereeing, my cousin gets to it all the time. It's like, are you the coach or are you the referee? Right. And now it's like, hey, Joel, you work for Oshawa? I'm like, no, Ottawa. Oshawa is my other one. But claim to fame, Chris, with only being my 5th draft, my cousin's claim to fame, and rightly so, is he was behind that Anthony Cirelli. Right, that's where he is. My cousin was either coached or helped mentor the Mississauga AA and AAA program. At the time, he was coaching with Don Cherry for the Mississauga Ice Dogs. And then when he left the Mississauga Ice Dogs, he now coaches and has for years the Mississauga Chargers. So he had followed Anthony Cirelli up as a AA player. I think in midget, he played for my cousin in the Mississauga Chargers, and obviously with Joe's ties with Oshawa, he brought Anthony Cirelli to the Oshawa Generals. But a small little story with regards to how my cousin ties into the Oshawa Generals is my cousin, Farzy, listen to this here. So my cousin played with Roger Hunt, Mike Kelly, and a couple other guys in Humber College. And all those guys, right, are obviously now, like Mike Kelly is the director of player scouting for the Oshawa Generals, and Roger is the GM. But I used to see all those guys when I played in the OHL. My cousin didn't drink, so he would just drive these guys around. And when I played like the Hamilton Dukes or I just remember all those guys coming to watch me play, and we talk about that now.
Let's
right?
just be honest, Washer, okay? The Humber College broadcasters sucked. All
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they had
know
any.
they had them.
I don't know if they did either. I don't know why we had them at
And who
Conestoga
cares
College.
if they did? It's Humber.
It's Humber.
I know you're going to be biased.
I don't even know where Humber is.
Exactly. It's by a river somewhere. Who cares?
Exactly.
Who cares?
Never heard of you.
I know you're going to be biased, but I do want to, because 5 years with the Ottawa 67s, and I was telling anybody who would listen, the year that got cut off by COVID, when it first hit us, right, 1920, heading into that playoff, I would always say the Ottawa 67s were the team that took it the hardest for obvious reasons. Some people would argue with Peterborough on that side. Some people would say Saginaw over on the west side. But I mean, how tough was that for the organization, Washer?
Yeah, it was not demotivating by any means, because we always try to draft the best players we can in every draft, right? But just leading up to what we had, right? My first year we lost to Hamilton, who ended up going far in the playoffs, right? We lost 4 straight, and then the following 2 years after that, we were in first place. I think either first place in the OHL or first place in the CHL as well. So, we had the coaching staff, we had the players, especially in 2019 when COVID hit. Definitely, what do you do, right? But definitely deflating. We knew that, as you guys know, it's not easy to be successful, and just one bad bounce could put you out or make you successful in going on to the next round. And we never got to prove our worth, right? We never got to show our goods. Did we expect that big things were on the horizon? Absolutely, right? But you just once you get knocked down like we all did in different aspects of sport and in life, when this pandemic first hit, you just get up and wipe yourself off and move on. And now we're looking for the future. What a messed up world that's been for the last 2 years, right? But we're looking to hopefully retool. This year we had one of the youngest OHL teams in the OHL. We had a successful year. The one thing that we really like about our kids that we have this year is their compete level, which you can't teach, right? They either have that relentlessness, that pursuit of always trying to get bigger and better. We feel that we have that foundation in place, from COVID. Like, guys, during COVID last year or the year before, believe it or not, I ended up watching OHL draft eligible kids in a backyard in Kitchener. So I think his name's Peter Hambley, Mr. Hambley. So he's a teacher.
He does that cool rink.
Yeah. So he's got a refrigerated rink. You can play like 2-on-2, 3-on-3, right? And he reached out to me through Cal Christner. So Cal Christner and Kean played all the way up, and then Cal played a little bit in Mississauga. So Cal must have given him my number, and he phoned me and he said, "Hey, listen, my kid is playing for HP. I'm going to invite some of the players from Kitchener. I'm going to invite some of the players from Waterloo." And I reached out to all the local scouts, Peterborough, North Bay, Windsor, a couple of other guys, to say, "Hey, if you're interested, these kids are going to be playing on a 2-on-2 outdoors." That's where I ended up watching. Murray Hubert, the very first weekend, and I were the only ones who showed up, right? And Murray, being the gentleman that he is, he was very, like, we were all just like, wow, I hope I said, he's like, "Washer, let me take a picture." He took a picture of me watching these kids with my Ottawa 67s scouting book, right? And you just talk to the kids, because I always said, my wife was like, "You're really going to do this?" I'm like, one, they're local kids. And if my kids were going through it, the least I can do is put on lawn johns and go sit outside and watch these kids play, right? Because that's all we were watching during COVID is practices, right? So that's the least as I could do as a person of this community, is to go out and watch these kids and give them an honest, fair rating. And I'd talk to them and they would ask questions. And of course, I could only give them the perspective of the 67s of how we operate and how we run our program, and what the expectations is of our players, or our draft eligible players, or players of interest, we call them, right? But I said to Murray when he snapped that photo, I said, you know what, this is history, but I hope I never have to do this shit again to watch a prospect. Like, it was just, but you just did what you did because we were still having to draft. We didn't know when, right? And we had to prepare the best way possible, right? And that's what we did. So crazy.
I know he's not around as much I'm sure, well, I don't know if he's around as much during the draft days and during drafts and stuff, but not around day to day in Brian Kilray. Being a member of the 67s organization, though, what's it like when he is around, when he just holds court and you get to listen to countless stories from a hockey icon?
It's the stories. Him and Bert, like they're like Bert and Ernie, like they don't go anywhere without each other, right? Now, Killer, I've always had a good relationship with those two, right? So, but when I joined, like they are the legends of, when they're in that room, they're just one of us, right? But to say that his presence didn't play a role in the rooms, like they still scout for us in the Ottawa area. They go to the tournaments. Like they didn't do it this year because one of them had, I think Killer had COVID, but they didn't. They go to the OHL Cup. They scout. They have a say on our draft table. And Dave Cameron or Andre Tournier, whoever, and James Boyd, Jan Eggert, they would always say, hey Bert, hey Killer, what do you think, right? And honestly, they are old in age, but they still are able to pick out the attributes of players that they like. And who does that? I think Killer's told me I had beers with him at the draft. I think he's 86, right? Now, when I first started 5 years ago, they used to sit around after the draft day with about 5 or 6 or 7 beers. Now it's just one tall boy, they're gone. Right? But when they do start telling stories, it's quiet, right? And people that aren't even associated with our team, they'll just sit there and listen. And the names, right? Obviously, they're getting older, right? So even when I talk to them about players, they'll say to me, "Okay, Washer, what years?" Right? Like I was telling them, about the Sangster scenario that they traded for him, and they'll say, "Okay, what year was that roughly, Washer?" I said, like 90, 91, right? And they'll be like, once you give them that, they can zero in on their roster of who was playing for them at the time, right? But they're always professional. Like they come in, like Killer's always wearing the turtleneck. Like you saw them at I was there as well at the prospects game, right? They're all in a suit and tie when other guys are just wearing, business casual. They're always professionals, right? But the stories, right, I remember when I first was on the scouting staff, and one of the younger guys, he's not on our staff now because he went to law school. But we had worked the Whitby Silver Stick, and these are long hours, guys. Like sometimes we're at the rink at like 7, 8 in the morning, and we're there till 8 at night, and then we'll go and we'll have some appetizers or meals and a couple beers, right? But he was a university student, and he ordered water, and Killer heard that, and Killer yells down, "Hey, did someone just order water?" Right? And so one of the guys beside Killer is like, "Yeah, you just ordered water." He says, "Who in the hell's having a shower down there?" Right? Like, and to me, again, that was 5 years ago. So he was like 81, but he was still with it, right? And the jabs. And I remember, like, we'll be in that room, even at training camp, whatever it'll be, right? And he'll lay his jabs in on Boydie or Dave Cameron or the Bear, right? Andre Tournier. And, he'll be like, I can't even give you a scenario or a name, but he'll be like, "Hey, Boydie, why don't you trade a couple used bags, a couple pucks and a couple broken sticks and hit this guy for a hockey player," right? And you're just like, "Oh my God, Killer, you can't say that stuff right now," right? But you know what? He can. right? And him and Bert, guys, even now, you'll see them. We all get to Lansdowne Park or TD, right, into the football, and they come in their car, and it's got its 67th logo on it. They travel all together. It probably just reeks of cigar. I've never been inside that. But like I said, it's like those guys off Muppets that sit in the stands, or Bert and Ernie, right? They're always beside each other. They golf. They were telling me they golf when they used to golf every day. Now they just golf Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, right? So
amazing. So good to hear.
Imagine being on the golf course. Like imagine being like showing up and you're like, oh, me and my brother went golfing today. So imagine just showing up and they're like, oh, we're paired you with another twosome today.
Yeah.
And it's those two. And like your day is just made.
Yeah. You know what you got to get, Chris? You got to get one of those little stands here, and I'm not very tech savvy. You just put it on your golf cart and you hit record.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
I'm telling you guys, like the stories that, again, once you give them the air, or once they get on a topic, like they're just great human beings. Like they're just good people. They make everyone feel welcomed, although they're the people. Like, we always say we get pictures. Like I have pictures with them because I always say to them, hey guys, do you mind if we get a group shot, of all our scouting staff? Because, I don't take it for granted. And you know what, one day God forbid, you're not going to be around. And, we had these good times. Right. And, the stories that they tell, and the more beers they have, like the more stories they tell and the more elusive they get. And, you can't replace that, gentlemen. You can't replace the stuff. They've forgotten more than we'll ever know in this sport, right? And you'll never ever replace that. So when they speak, we always listen. We always value their input, both of them. But I'm telling you, that you would think that an 85-year-old or an 86-year-old, and Bird's probably 83, have lost it, and the games pass them by. But I'm telling you, the attributes that they bring out, because Boydie will ask them, well, why do you think this? Right? And he'll say, well, I saw him play here, and here's what I like, and here's the kid. And even if we were not fortunate enough to select the boy, the kid that usually Boydie and Jan and the guys and myself are talking to Killer and Bird about, if we're not fortunate enough to pick them, they go usually right sort of after we make our selection, right? And they're not far off, right? So
I want to be respectful of your time here, Washer, but I've got to ask one more before we go. Yeah. Joel Washkurak, scout, would he draft Joel Washkurak, the 17-year-old hockey player?
Great question.
Oh boy, Farzy.
Great question. Great
question.
Yeah,
I think so. Right. I was a little bit back in the day, not a loose cannon, but I didn't like rules. Right. Which made it really ironic, and that I refereed. Even when I refereed, I figured, screw it. I broke all these rules. I might as well now try and enforce it. But you can't. And that's like me being a really, really skilled guy, and then being a coach and pushing to be completely, rough, tough, and tumble and completely offside. But yeah, you know what, Farzy, great question. I would draft me because it's the fabric that I believe is important in this game and still needs to be a part of it. You need to be tough. You need to be hard to play against, right? You need to be super skilled. You need to be able to play. I always say, what they'll ask me, even with my own team, and I always say, you need to be able to score 4 or 5 goals or 10 goals and then kick the shit out of them, or kick the shit out of them and then score 5, 6, 7, 10 goals, right? But I had, part of my preaching, right, is the way my kid plays, both my boys, right? Even the one that plays at Wellesley, he does his best and he works hard and he's a defenseman, but he also brings that sandpaper side of it, where Kean, I've never had, I always told you when after about Adam or Pee Wee, I just said to him, hey bud, like those 30, whatever the goals were a year, that's going to come to an end, right? And if you look at my son's games, year over year, they're pretty consistent, right? Once he gets into it, right? Like he'll average, in his first year in the OHL, first year in the American League, 10 plus goals, similar type assists, like 500 that way. And he always has had 40, 50, 60 penalty minutes. I think this year he ended up with, about 50 pims. He had a couple good scraps, and I always say he fights like his mother, right? So, it's all good.
Not
But
touching that one.
No. Oh, she doesn't trust me with the three of us running around here. She doesn't. And her brother played for the Cambridge Winterhawks and with Scotty Walker and Todd Harvey. So trust me, I'm a saint compared to this guy. My brother. He's a great guy. He's a police officer, but in Toronto, but you know what? I could come home and do a whole bunch of stuff and it wouldn't phase her because she's grown up with it her whole life, right? But you know what? Yeah, I would draft a 17-year-old Joel Washkurak. I'd straighten him out real quick, right? Right, but you know what?
If Mav did straighten you out, I don't know if you have a shot here.
He did, but you know what? Mav worked hard, but he also played hard, right? And as you got older with Mav, right, you got to know Mav as a person, right? Because you came to work, as long as you came to work, right? And then he would always, have beers with the vets and the 20-year-olds and a lot of the overagers, Chris, a lot of the guys that played overage for Mav, Bigsy, when I played, Garth Joy, they all came back and coached with Mav, right? So that tells you the relationship right there.
Big
right?
time.
And I miss those guys in the game. And like I said, we're fortunate enough to still have Burton Killer in it, but we've lost a few good ones, right? And you know what? The game will always evolve. There's more good people in the game than there is bad. And you know what? We just keep the good people, just keep weeding the bad people out of the game and just make it better, player wise and coach wise and scouting wise, right?
I know we have to let you go, and I know it's almost Farwell's bedtime, but I just want to quickly point out, Caden obviously playing in Wellesley, big win in the first round against Cambridge, lost against Tavistock in the second round. Yeah. Kean, who we've mentioned a couple times, onto the third round with Springfield. I'm curious about Kean being in Springfield, and I'm wondering about his hearing, because I know his assistant coach tends to be a bit of a pit bull on the bench, and I'm wondering if he has anything to say about Daniel Tkachuk, because he used to coach the Rangers, and this guy does not shut up. It's unbelievable.
Really? Yeah, I met Daniel. So I went up to see Kean a couple months ago. So when he was in Belleville, we were right in the January shutdown. So he was in Belleville Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And my wife was losing it because we couldn't even go visit. We couldn't go to the Belleville games, which we would have. I sent my kid to Slovakia. I hadn't seen Kean play in 2 years. And then Sunday they stayed at the Harbor Castle downtown Toronto, and Lori was like, he's an hour away and we can't even go watch him because they wanted nothing to do with COVID. And then Hasty tried to sneak. He phoned me and said, "Hey, Washer, I'm doing Kean's game against the Marlies. If I can get you in, will you come?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." But then you think about it and you're like, "Hey, Hasty, how am I, like, there's no fans allowed, right? Like, how are we going to do this?" Right. And he's like, "Well, Washer," he goes, I said, no, listen, I said, don't backdoor me in there like as an official or a backup official. I said, because this is my son's first year. He's the only 20-year-old on the American League, right? And I just said to him, "Hasty, you better call the Marlies office." And then he phoned me back and he's like, "Washer, you're right. I can't do it. They don't want the COVID or the exposure." And I was like, but I ended up going into Laval. I hit a few games on the Sunday driving up to Laval. I went to go watch Markham and Quinty and doing my job for Ottawa. Took Kean out for dinner, but I ended up meeting Daniel Tkachuk in the lobby, right? And he calls me Big Washer, and I didn't know how to take that, right? Because, of the baldness and the 60 extra pounds since Farzy interviewed me 27 years ago at Conestoga College, right? But he was a great guy. And I just said to him, "Hey, Chucky," and I said, "Can I call you Chucky? Because that's what Kean calls you," when I talk to him. But Kean's never, he says that they are very, it's professional hockey. Like, it's very thorough. It's very regimented. Like, he loves the lifestyle, right? He shows up at the rink every morning, right? He has coffee and breakfast there and lunch, and then just has to worry about, playing hockey. And, he was told at the beginning of the year he's on the outside looking in, and he was only healthy scratched, I think, maybe 2 or 3 regular season games, and one playoff game. So I think the future is bright for him. I just hope it works out for him. It's hard. Many are called, few are chosen, right? So it's not an easy task, but
one of only, I think, 2 or 3 20-year-olds on that team. And I only brought up Chucky just because Mike Van Ryn, when he coached in Kitchener, used to call him his little chihuahua on the bench.
really?
Because he's such a good hockey player. Like his skating is something I've never seen from anyone else.
Agreed.
But during the game, he just sees so much. He just doesn't stop yelling. He would come after one game, he'd come out and his voice would sound like that and he couldn't talk. I'm like, what are you doing tomorrow? Like, you have another game tomorrow. How are you going to be able to coach? Yeah, he was awesome.
I'll have to ask Keen about that tomorrow, because he that's who he does his video breakdown with, right? Because Chucky runs the forwards, right?
Yeah,
and genius. He'll say the odd time Drew Bannister will chime in there on some, but he says that mostly on his video reviews, Chucky runs the show with the forwards, right? But he's never said that. So,
maybe he's quieted down.
Maybe. Washer, I hope that, because you clearly haven't, and neither have I hope in 27 years we can be watching back this interview we've done together and just have some shits and giggles together over this over all these years in the game. Hey?
Yeah, I could do this every night. You can call me tomorrow and we can rock it out and, get to know each other even better.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, guys,
this has been great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It's great talking about my career and my family, and, you guys are great. And thank you so much for having me on it and still making me an important hockey person.
You are, buddy. Every time we see you around the rink, you got it. Thanks for doing
Absolutely.
this.
It's that big smile, eh?
You know it.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Good luck with everything. Have a good summer, fellas.